I think somebody left their phone up there.
No, it's recording.
Oh, sorry. Already I'm messing up. Okay. So, hi, my name's Alison, and this is my second year at UCSB, so it's really wonderful to just be here in this space. So, I have to admit that when I thought about talking today, I had to really think deeply about what it is that I would talk about. And some of that is because I feel like I have to kind of create a context for what it means to do intersectional research. And so when I thought even about the title, I was really conscious of what it meant to think about Latinx as a term, and to think about identity as being more than representation, but also specifically about resistance. So, let's see. Oh, there it is again. Okay, just in case you forgot. And so something that I think is also really important is that when we're thinking about the term Latinx in particular, it's really about a way of thinking about authenticity. And so it's forceful in that way, and I'll talk about that. So, identity formation is nothing new in the larger psychological literature. In fact, we have lots of identity models to describe how people come into their identities around race and ethnicity, how we might think about ourselves as gendered individuals, as men, women, non-binary. And so I went on a deep dive in Google to try to find a term that I thought would be kind of layman's terms of trying to understand, how to think about identity formation. And as you can see here, what this definition gives to us is really understanding about, how individuals see themselves in the world, and how that is also connected to affiliation in the way that we develop community. So something exciting that I feel like we're starting to see today is really about the use of Latinx. And so as you can see in these photos, Latinx is really meant to symbolize something that has to do with place and with culture. And the way that I see it, Latinx is inconvenient. I mean, it's meant to be hard on the tongue because it makes you have to think about, to be more conscious of what it means around culture, but also what it means around gender. And so, a slight, history lesson, but, Latin America is really tied to how we think about, the places that were colonized by Spain and by Portugal. That's literally what Latin America is today. And so Spanish in and of itself is a colonized language. So it was meant to really, erase and replace a lot of indigenous languages for folks who were in Latin America before it became Latin America. And so when we think about that, the use of the X is inconvenient as it should be, and it's something to embrace. We also have to recognize that the term Latinx will probably be something really different 10 to 20 years from now because language is constantly evolving, and that's a really beautiful thing to embrace. And so, the term Latinx, it started in the early 2000s in queer online communities. And so it wasn't based in the United States, but it was based in other areas of what we consider Latin America. And folks in cultural studies have been talking about Latinx for a longer period of time to really talk about its transgression, that it's meant to be inconvenient, but it's also meant to pay tribute to indigenous people and to Afro-Latinx people who have been largely ignored in what we think about when we think about Latinx folks. So, in today's world, when we think about identity and belongingness and resistance, especially for queer and Latinx communities, we really have to think about the ways that identity is formed in response to tragedy in some ways. And so in 2016, the Pulse nightclub massacre happened, right? And it was the deadliest massacre on US land, and it happened on Latin night at a gay club in Orlando, Florida. And so myself, having been one of the leaders of an LGBT Latinx professional organization that was having its conference in Orlando, we were talking about having our night there. And so for us, it was very real, the kinds of dangers that we face within our community. And so the artist, Julio Salgado, he created this really beautiful photo in the middle. And it's talking about don't stop dancing, right? That even when, or a pulse or the threat of violence, that we have to continue to live our lives and to be as fabulous as we can be. I really love this quote that he stated, or that he put out the same day that he put out that art piece. And what it says is, a Latin night at a gay club is not just a place to dance cumbia and salsa. It's a place for brown and black bodies to come together and dance the night away, to try and forget for at least one evening about the bullshit we deal with every single day. Every time we go out and be our full queer selves, there's a fear in the back of our heads that someone will harm us. So circling back to being an applied psychologist and a behavioral health researcher, it's really important, that in the research that I do, that I don't forget about pulse. But I also think about the daily chronic stress that many queer and trans people experience, and particularly queer and trans people at the intersection of race and gender identity. And so we know, Elon Meyer, he created minority stress theory in the 90s, and it's still incredibly popular in LGBT health research. But what we know is that the chronic high levels of stress that queer and trans communities face are harmful to the body. And it's not just that we're constantly dealing with stress, it's also that we face barriers in our ability to access systems of wellness. So from, wow, 2 minutes, okay. So in my own work, I really think a lot about intersectional minority stress. And so something really important to know is that Boehmer in 2002, so it's a little older, but they ran a meta-analysis of all health research on LGBT people, and they found that 85% of research didn't talk about race or ethnicity at all. They didn't even ask about it. And so we know that a significant portion of what we consider to be current knowledge and data and what we rely on as being truthful for LGBT populations may not be truthful for the great majority of those folks across race and gender. And so my own work really centers the experiences of sexual minority women, and particularly queer women of color. And the reason I care a lot about that is because that's my community, but also because we know that about 80% or more of federal funding in LGBT health research is directed toward men who have sex with men. And that is really important research. But what it also means is that many queer women and queer women of color are being largely ignored in what their health issues are. So, in a study that I did more recently, that is now out, yay, finally, I did, really focus on identity formation. And so what I want to say before that is that my research really is focused on health. I care a lot about alcohol use disorder, I care a lot about cardiovascular risk and the ways that stress breaks down the body. But I know that before we can even get there, we have to talk about how people even just understand who they are in the world. And so that when we create interventions or treatments, that we're paying attention to the full cultural beings that people are. And so part of my research has also been in the process of understanding identity formation in an intersectional way. And so here, there are a couple of quotes that really talk about the ways that intersectional minority stress or intersectional identity has both pros and cons. And so that there's beautiful, aspects of resilience, what we've heard here today, but there's also direct threats to safety that many people in our community experience. And so I'll let you read that, hold on a second. The last thing is that I really loved this book. I read it, and I thought it was really wonderful. And so I'm really hoping that in the same way that Dante and Ari, right, are able to be their full selves, that hopefully the work that I can do in my career can really respect the ways that queer women of color and just queer people of color experience health at the intersection of race, gender identity, and sexual orientation. And I want as much as possible to change the narrative so that we're not always talking about pulse, or we're not always talking about negative, violent experiences, but we also use identity as resistance and as a way to promote health.